Hello everybody, I'm trapped in a locker, so let's do another challenge for Bloons Tower Defense 6. Today we'll be beating CHIMPS mode with just bomb shooters, the hero Etienne, and a simple 002 dart. As you can see, there were the rules on screen. The reason I'm picking 1002 dart is because the opening few levels of this are extremely difficult to do with just one bomb shooter. And we need something for camos because we're not going to be able to get Etienne as early as we usually do. As you can see right there, we already leaked one single red balloon, and it's a pretty RNG heavy opening start. Sometimes you get it good, sometimes you don't. It's very picky about how it decides to operate. But overall, once we get through the beginning, it's not as bad as you would expect it to be. Because bomb towers aren't super horrible. They're actually really good, especially the bottom path, which has recently been buffed to pop black balloons, which was the bomb shooter's only real weakness before that. So yeah, with that being said, I will jump in later on to explain the strategy a little bit better when we actually get going. And here we have our second early game death. So we have to do a little bit better micromanaging with some slow-mo. I have the Dart Monkey set to strong to try and pop as many of the greens down to blues as possible, so the bomb shooter can clean up a little bit left. But it's not always 100% effective. As you can see, there are greens slipping through. So I'm trying to micromanage with the bomb shooter a little bit to get it to pop some of the more difficult balloons sooner. Then that way we don't have as much of an issue. Alright, as you can see there, with a little bit of micromanaging and some RNG, we were able to get past that, but we did have to buy a mid-round upgrade for the bomb shooter, which does kind of set us back on getting Etienne, as well as sort of lock that bomb shooter in place as to what it's going to be. That one will wind up being our Moab Eliminator, which will come in handy during the mid-game, but as of right now, it's not a big necessity. So I'm opting to get the second bomb shooter here because as you can see, these early rounds have been really difficult, and we kind of need the extra firepower, no pun intended, to get under control a little bit better. But it is another pretty hard setback on getting Etienne, which means we won't get levels for him as much as we need, which will come back to bite us later on in the run. Alright, so as you just saw right there, round 15 was another really dicey round that required some RNG and upgrades to be bought, which further put Etienne on the back burner. This is probably going to be the latest we will ever get a hero in the entire series of these challenges, and it kind of goes to show just how tough it is to do this with the bomb shooter. But it ultimately comes together in the mid to late game, because bomb shooter, that's kind of where bomb shooter excels. We got Etienne finally in round 18, and with that said, we'll wind up getting the rest of the bomb towers placed, and I'll explain the strategy from there.
A great time. Drone power.
So I know that placement looks a little bit off, given that it's only going to target a certain area, but trust me when I say that's going to come in handy later, because that will become our recursive cluster, and the spread on the recursive cluster's massive AoE bomb is extremely large, and will even wind up hitting down towards the bottom row underneath the pond, as well as some of the range upgrades we'll get being letting it be able to target the front row. And then from that, the one right underneath it will be our balloon impact to stun everything in place for the recursive cluster to just start picking away at. And then the one on the far right will be our Moab Eliminator, mostly because it's just there for some extra damage. If any Moabs get super far, plus the ability is more of what we need it for anyway. It's not the greatest tier 5, but it does have its purposes, and it does deal some pretty massive damage to the BAD. Yeah, as you can see now, that recursive splash is pretty incredible. It does a lot of damage, and it's really fast with the second path upgrade. So it's a impressive DPS option, especially with how much range it has to cover with just one shot.
Tracking MOAB. Swarm deployed. Swarm deployed. Eyes on that exit.
And that was the first instance of Etienne not having enough levels to come back and screw me over. As you can see, he's just a little bit under level 8, which would give him his UCAV for Universal Camo.
Yeah. Tracking MOAB. Adieu.
Alright, and there we have our first tier 5 of the run. So I didn't really have a big plan going into this. I was mostly just relying on balloon impact and recursive cluster for the DPS on the smaller balloons. And I was just going to use the MOAP eliminator on some of the bigger balloons to try and make sure I didn't have a massive line of blimps just stopping my defenses. And I think that worked out pretty well, in all honesty.
Tracking. How it's done.
So I was sweating round 63 a little bit because I wasn't sure if the pierce on the balloon impact would be enough to stun the clumps of ceramics, but as you can see, it looks like it actually was, more or less. I mean, it did enough to make sure I didn't leak anything, so I was very impressed that it didn't actually struggle as much as I thought it would. Okay, that death was entirely my fault because I didn't activate Etienne's ability in time. I really thought the recursive cluster and balloon impact would have enough to be able to stop
Tracking
that,
MOAB.
but I guess I was very much wrong.
Tracking BFB.
Alright, so now we have our second tier 5, the Bomb Blitz. As you can see, it is a very effective tower dealing massive amounts of damage. It also has an ability too, which doesn't really come in handy on Chimps mode, where it just bombs the entire screen if you leak a balloon. But given the fact that we only have one life, we can't really use that ability. But I will show some interesting interactions it has later on when I move on to different challenges with this game.
Adieu. Adieu. C'est beau. Tracking BFB. Adieu. Tracking MOAB. How it stop? How it stop? How it stop? Yeah. Adieu. Adieu. Tracking ZOMG. Adieu.
As you can see, the 90s are a bit rough, but I'm opting to hold off on buying anything until I get the Balloon Impact, because Balloon Impact, much like Moab Domination, is an absolute game changer when you get it. It is a very pricey upgrade coming in at 59,000, but it is ultimately worth it because the stun it offers you on Moab
C'est
balloons
beau.
is incredible. So I'm going to wait on and hold off on that,
Utility.
even though the 90s are really difficult.
How it's done. C'est la guerre. Tracking BFB. Utility. How it's done. Weapons hot. Tracking COMG. How it's done.
And there you can see it stopped all of those ZOMGs and BFBs in place. That is how good Balloon Crush is.
Aïe.
It is pricey, but once you can actually afford to get it, it is very useful. And from here, the main strat is just going to be spamming recursive clusters around the map, because I think that it is probably the best tier 4 upgrade
Tracking
to
MOA.
spam for the bomb tower. As you can see, the Balloon Crush does eventually start to get pierce capped and things start to slowly move past. That is why we have to rely on backup towers instead of just sitting on these three like I did with the Boomerang.
C'est beau.
But with that said, I
Tracking.
don't really think there's
Tracking
much I
MOA.
could
How
have done
it's done.
differently with this. I think maybe some better optimization in the first few rounds could have gotten us Etienne a little bit faster, and we wouldn't have lost to that one clump of camos that I didn't activate the ability for in time. Outside of that, this was a really interesting challenge. The early game was very dicey, and the mid game was pretty standard, all things considered. I think that it's easily a very doable challenge. It's not as much of a just sit back and go through it as the Boomerang was. This one does require full on attention and careful management of abilities. But yeah, with that said, next week or this Friday we will be doing TAC, and I hope that you guys tune in for that one.
Hey. How it's done. Oui. Adieu. Oui. Heads up, tracking BAD. Bonsoir, droid. Adieu.
We're just going to do a quick check on how many pops the Dart Monkey has to make sure it's not anything super outrageous.